about VR and immersion and the narrative and whatever takes our fancy. So I'd just like to go along the panel and I'll let these guys introduce themselves. Start with yourself, John.
Cool. So hi, John King. Been working in games for about 15 years now, across a load of different disciplines, mainly in design. Done a lot of mission design, level design, mechanics design, and quite more recently I've ended up working in VR as kind of specialised in narrative and spending a lot of time thinking about experience. I'm currently working on PSVR for Sony London studio.
Rhoda?
I'm Rhoda Ellis. I'm a PhD student studying sculpture, both physically and virtually. But my background actually started in neuroscience. I studied sensory transduction and how we experience the world. I got disillusioned with science and went into teaching for a while, so I was learning on how we learn, and especially looking at bodily learning. And then I've kind of meandered into being at art college and studying art and philosophy, and then 2 years ago I did my degree showpiece using virtual reality because finally I felt like I had a medium to discuss aesthetics of sculpture in virtual reality.
Thank you. Mal?
I'm Malath Abbas, or Malath for short, from Biome Collective. It's an organisation I co-founded, and essentially we are a co-working space for people to make games, explore technology from both a kind of a making and a research kind of point of view. And I myself, I come from a kind of a 3D modelling and animation background, and I've been kind of designing and producing games for maybe close enough to 10 years now. And as part of Biome, we've been lucky enough to kind of experiment with various AR things and VR. Currently we're working on a VR game where you're gardening and making music at the same time, so that's me.
Thanks, Mal.
Hello, I'm Chris McLaughlin. I'm tech director for a little VR, I guess we could call it a startup. Yeah, let's do that. I'm a VR startup. I've been making games for 13 years, let's say. VR for 5 or 6 years. I've released a bunch of, I've worked on a bunch of location-specific games that were launched in Japanese arcades. Released one game on Oculus a couple of years ago, and that's pretty much what I do.
Excellent.
Video games.
Thanks very much. What I thought we'd start with is maybe you could each think about a VR project you're particularly proud of, or even if it's not one you've seen, perhaps something you particularly admire. I'll start with you, John, because you're right there, and I understand Blood and Truth is currently on sale on the PlayStation store.
It is, yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, she'll buy it. It's great. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'd like to answer kind of both of them actually. One that I'm proud of, and one that I think is really interesting. So I'm proud of all of the stuff that that I've worked on and what our teams have worked on. But I think for me it's VR Worlds, which is our first VR title, which I'm really proud of, because I think with VR there's it was just such a new thing to us, and it was such a big change, and so many things that we learned making traditional games we had to unlearn, and we had to go back, and we had to really just experiment with it. And I think for me is the kind of the first thing we've done that we demoed to kind of help announce the PSVR headset, which was Ocean's Descent. And yeah, I think it was a really interesting one, because it started with a very simple concept, which was certainly from a narrative point of view, we quite often ask just very simple questions. It was good to see this one translate, and that was really the question we were kind of asking ourselves: was what if the thing you were in that was protecting you become the thing that imprisoned you? And I think we managed to get that through with the whole with the shark coming in when it come down. So you've got this beautiful view as you're going down. We're telling this lovely little story, and then we just flip it on its head, and it's I just proud of how powerful that's been and how it's been received.
say that I made my mum play that. I didn't tell her there was a shark in it. That was the best fun I've had. I thought she might die, but she was fine in the end. Anyway, who else wants to jump in with a project? Rhoda, do you want to tell us about your art school project, maybe?
I'll talk about one that I'm proud of that I've made, and then someone that inspired me. So, 2 years ago, as I was saying, for my degree show project, I made a piece called Being in the Gallery, which was a gallery within a gallery. So you would put on a headset, and then push open the door, and you'd walk into the gallery space, and what you would see is a statue with a hand out in a gesture, and then you could go in and you could touch the hand, and then once you realised that the hand was touchable, you could touch the whole sculpture, and then quite often people would take the headset off and they would look at the original sculpture, because what they were seeing in the headset would be a copy, but everything kind of lined up. So that was my introduction to VR, was trying to make something where I had a concept that I could make, like basically a mixed reality. This was going back a couple of years, so it was quite innovative. And I would say the work that's inspired me the most is probably the work of Charles Davis, who was in the first wave of VR, and she did a lot of more kind of pieces that were controlled using the body. Because I was looking at feminism in VR and the history of feminist artists and how they were making. And so she made one where you could control your movement up and down using breathing. So you were diving underwater, but in this case you were in a forest and you were moving around and going up and down using breathing. So that kind of very bodily experiences of VR.
I too will answer with two things. I think very much like John in terms of our first VR project, Garden, the one we're still working on at the moment, I love the fact that we had to go back to basics again. Everything we thought we knew was not going to work, was broken, was bad, so we had to really go down to kind of basic design fundamentals and focus on the kind of user experience we wanted. So it was really cool. It was just fun to kind of strip away the tech, focus on people's experience, and slowly build something up. I think we created something that is, kind of people feel empowered, they feel creative, which is what we wanted. So watch this space for gardening. But aside from that, I've played quite a few VR experiences that were quite cool, interesting, and moved me. But I had the pleasure of visiting the Emblematic Group, which is a studio that's run by Noni de la Peña, who's kind of known as the godmother of VR. So this was about 3 years ago. We had the chance to visit her studio in San Francisco, and we got to kind of see some of the early prototypes they were working on. I think some of that studio's work has gone on to kind of be, there's a prison experience that you can download through the Guardian. So there's a lot of this kind of documentary-based work. And one piece of work in particular was focused around domestic abuse, and it actually used a real-life phone call to the emergency services, and you were then put into this kind of 3D world, and you were experiencing it in terms of the real audio coming through, and the graphics were terrible. They were really kind of basic placeholder visuals, things that kind of downloaded for free. And at first you're like, this is a bit weird, it's a bit cheap. But then as soon as the audio kicks in, and it sucks you right in. And being able to kind of move around a spatial environment and having that sense of realism to the audio was very, very moving. And I think that experience still stuck in my mind. And it combines reality with kind of really basic 3D visualization. And it was really struck me how powerful that was.
Thanks, man.
I think one of the things I'm most proud of is a game that we've never managed to find a release route for. It's called Tiny Escape, and one of you plays a normal human-sized robot, one of you plays a tiny little alien, and the idea is the alien's got to escape from the lab, and the big guy's got to squash it. But like in this, you've got the shared space. It's a two-player game, and one of you is tiny, you're like 6 inches tall, less than, another's human, and sharing a space with someone who's like that much bigger than you, but you can tell from their movement, even though it's like a robot, you can tell that's another person, and they can look at your sort of weird squelchy little body and tell that you're an actual person controlling that. And like there's issues with the controls, it doesn't feel quite nice, but pretty much everyone that played it really enjoys it. And we saw like a lot of dynamics, like children playing being the robot with their mum or dad being the tiny person, and they would just like love how much bigger they were than their mum and dad. And being able to give people that experience, like it's a ridiculous experience, but it's sort of switching roles kind of. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, like the fact that you're in a normal environment and you're standing on a desk, but because you're that size, you look down and it feels like you're on top of a 10-story building, and people would be like afraid to move from the spot, even though they're like in an empty room with nothing around them. And we weren't trying to make a scary experience. People were terrified because if they go that way, they will fall to their death, and if they go that way, the robot will see them and catch them. And there's proper like fear in people, which is amazing to be able to get that out of people, especially by accident. So I'm very proud of that. Sad I'm not able to do anything with it, but one day. And something that's inspired me, there's a game called Virtual Reality, which is the entire game is about putting on virtual reality goggles inside virtual reality, and you sort of go deeper and deeper, sort of Inception style, and you go down, you come back, and it's got this story, and it's all about a robot corporation or something. I can't remember the details. That's how inspired it was. But it goes on, and there's like so many options at every stage. There's like different sets of glasses you can go pick up. There's different rooms you can go into, and even though there's so many options, somehow it all ties together, and it takes you through the story. And I've only played through it once, but it feels like there's a story and it tells you this story, and it probably branches and comes back, but everyone gets basically the same story, even though it feels like you've got an insane amount of choice. And however they manage to pull that all and keep all these bits of thread like in one big long string, that's amazing.
Cool.
That's an inspiring piece of story.
I don't know if there's any publishers in the room, but I want to play that game where you're a robot or a little squishy person. And I know my daughter would.
I'll bring that next time.
Thanks. You touched on something there, Chris, that how that game told a story, and that's kind of something I'd like to sort of maybe talk about next, is how you tell stories in VR experiences. Is it different from regular games? Is it different from other forms of storytelling? Who wants to have a pop at that?
Can I ask if people to speak up, maybe speak up to the ceiling, just to hear over the building?
Yeah, Rhoda, go
Yeah,
for
I'll
it.
go first. I think I'm the only one here that's not a games designer by trade, so that I've kind of learned stuff. I'm having to learn for VR, whereas I think a lot of people are having to unlearn some of the things they've learned in order to learn it back up again, and that's kind of interesting. So maybe looking at some of the other ways people use narrative, like in theatre, and we discussed earlier about was it in cultural centres where you're going around and trying to have a story in other places, you know, in sort of a location-based story. And I think it's looking at those mediums rather than necessarily sticking with looking at games, but going out and looking at other ways of telling stories.
John, you want to maybe told a few stories in VR?
We have, yeah, and they're always tricky. I think so. Environmental storytelling for me is something that's become much more. I mean, it's powerful in games anyway, but I think once you're in an environment, you kind of really have to tell a story of that. I suppose it doesn't always have to necessarily be your main plot, so to speak. There's like stories within the environment and how you get things across, and all of that can support your plots. But there's so much. I think there's so much else that we've got. I mean, I think we were talking before this about the importance of audio, and you know, we're starting to find like kind of being in an environment and having other forms of kind of media like TVs or radios, things that we can kind of hit you with some sound and try and get some storytelling across is going to be important. But also the characters in the world as well. Like in Blood and Truth, we've got about 45 kind of drama scenes, so to speak, and there's a lot going on there. And it's again, I suppose it's much like we said with the environments, right, and the with the characters as well. It's not just what they're saying; it's what they're doing, and we're finding that performance is a massive part of telling the story, as much as like who the character is what they're wearing, and we have to dig right the way down into understanding who these characters are and to kind of pull that out.
I was going to ask about the importance of performance, because particularly in Blood and Truth, you've got. So that doesn't continue. In Blood and Truth, you've got a serious amount of cast, like, and
Yes.
all of its performance captured. I mean, that must be quite a nice luxury on Blood and Truth. Was
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun.
Do you want to expand on that, or?
Yeah, no, it's really fun to play with. Although, I mean, spoiler alert for those who've played Blood and, or haven't played Blood and Truth, we do kill a lot of our cast off as we go through, which is yeah, that's quite a challenging thing actually, because what we were doing, there was a need in our story to kind of take away our cast, kill them as we're going through, but you have to really work hard to get the player attached to your cast, and obviously when you're in VR, that's actually you know, so it's like it's not necessarily just down to the performance, but it's down to like the reactions and how they acknowledge you in the world, because you need to feel part of it in order to essentially build up a relationship with a character, so that we can get you know, the kind of the emotion that we want when we want to remove that character from the player's world. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you for expanding.
That's all right.
You guys want to have anything to mention? I mean, you talked about how the storytelling in that Inception type game. How did it tell the story?
There's like one main character who, like, he's like your captor. You're kind of trapped in this world, and you've got to earn enough money by doing virtual reality jobs to get your way out. And he's like a robot, faceless robot who talks to you, and his like head like a bubble lights up as he talks. But he's there. He's just far enough away from him that you can't touch him. Which is the thing. One of the things, having a character in front of you in VR is like incredibly powerful. Like, it's kind of uncomfortable, I think, sometimes. If you go to like I don't know, like a one-on-one performance, like at the Fringe, and you're sitting there and there's an actor right here, like that's just a weird thing. And VR kind of can get like that. And this is maybe the game developer in me. The first time I ever played the London Heist, the original demo for it, you're meant to be tied to this chair. There's this like hard man, he's right in your face, and all I'm doing is like poking him in the eyes and like try to like walk around him and see if his head will spin all the way around. And
I think that
like
says more about you.
Yeah, it says a lot about me, but you have to somehow work out. You don't have to, but like players will do stuff like that, and they wouldn't do that in real life. They'd be tied to the chair, but they like how do you react to a player just feels one doing like mental stuff, like trying to put your hand inside someone's face, but even like more subtle stuff, like if they're invested in playing along, which hopefully that's the situation you want, and like people who are going to get up and walk through the cupboards, you can probably kind of ignore them because they're going to mess up anyway. If you've got someone who just puts their hand out because like, someone's coming at them, you want the character to react to that, because if they don't, then that feels weird and breaks the immersion, and then the story kind of is lost because they're thinking, why did that guy go to my hand? And I don't really know what the answer to that is. Like lots of artificial intelligence, lots of really, really clever stuff, or you do stuff like virtual reality does, where the character's far enough away that you can't mess around too much, but then you miss out on some of this intimacy. So I'm not really talking about how to do storytelling, just like there's more of the issues that happen in VR that you don't get in a traditional game or in a movie, because the players technically can choose to mess stuff up. Yeah. Or not even mess stuff up, just react in a slightly different way, and just different enough that the world doesn't react back to you and you're like, oh, I'm playing a game.
Yeah. How about you, Mal? Has Garden got a narrative element to it?
Yeah, so Garden has it's a narrative game ultimately on some level, and it's a narrative we've been working on for a very long time, and you come to our office is like reams and reams of paper, and we're trying to kind of redesign. It's kind of environmental narrative kind of design sort of thing. And I guess one of our biggest challenges is, when we started making the game in terms of narrative, was the idea of there's an orb that drops right at the start of the game, and to focus your attention on that. But people if you don't get the timing right, people just look away and then miss this orb that comes down, for example. So just things like that, you have to, I think it's about thresholds, and I think the threshold to get people to buy into the experience is quite high. But once you get over that threshold, you've got them, and you can do all sorts of stuff, and people actually have bought in. And I think that it comes down to, as Rhoda said, it's about looking kind of at what people do in terms of theatre and stage design, and really kind of building environments that are worthy of people exploring and doing their own thing, and then being able to kind of lead the audience through particular narrative notes, through different cues. For Garden, it's primarily an audio game, so we focus on that. But in terms of production, we don't have the budgets that Sony might have, for example. So we can't afford to have a huge cast, etc. So we've kind of really pared down the visuals, but really kind of focus our attention on the audio. And I think for us, we've simplified the visuals so much that it's quite abstracted. People seem to be kind of bought into it very quickly, and then we focus on the narrative to kind of slowly feed the kind of hints and ideas for the audience. I think it's really tough, it's really challenging, but it's definitely a threshold that once you get over it, you're kind of bought in. I remember an early VR experience I played, I was kind of trapped in a room, it was like a escape room style thing, and I think it was the first time I used kind of room scale VR, and at the time it was like, wow, this is brand new, it knows it can track where I am. And I was at some kind of, I think it was at Game City in Nottingham, and I was on the floor crawling, and it was just kind of public place, and I just paused for a minute and thought, what am I doing? Because I was in the game world, I was going through this kind of air duct, and I just thought, hold on. And I just poked my head out of the air duct, because obviously there's no air duct, obviously, and I could see the stuff behind the skybox or the units, whatever. I thought, oh, that's quite cool. And then I put my head back in, and I carried on. So they got me. I was over that particular threshold, and it didn't really matter that I saw the smoke and the mirrors. I was brought into the experience. I think when you go to see a theatre production, at some point you can see that it's all someone's built this artistically, and it's all set design. But there's a point in that theatre show where you suspend your disbelief, and you just accept it. And things are weird and wonderful, and things fly at you, and the smoke, and you just bought in. So I think there's a particular threshold. Once we get over that, we can be very creative.
So we've touched on some of the challenges there in terms of VR storytelling, but are there any unique or somewhat unique opportunities to storytelling, maybe in terms of immersion with VR? Is there any particular advantages? Al's nodding.
I'll keep it brief. Many advantages. Because it's a new paradigm, I would say, that it opens up just a different level of immersion, and yeah, if the player's the focus, it can really elevate particular feelings, emotions. So yeah, once you're in as an audience member, once we've got you hooked, we can really, I think, drive an interesting narrative and different emotional arcs once you're in. Because you are surrounded, you are fully immersed. Yeah, that's what we found from our experience.
I think kind of talking about the player, when you look at, so if you look at more traditional games or even films, when you're telling a story, I think you have to work really hard to get the player, to get the audience to buy in to the character that they're watching, but they're still always outside of it. And there's, like, even if you're watching on TV or in a cinema or anything, you've got that, there's a divide between you and the kind of the thing that you're watching, and it's always there and reminding you. So I think you do have to work really hard to get the audience to care about the people in front of them. But I think with VR, because you're in there, especially if you're telling a story specifically about the player, the audience, and not the character, I think that's one of the kind of real benefits, is that I think it's kind of easier to buy into it and to kind of maybe begin to follow some of the rules.
But then I think because you're in there, you've got to build not just with a visual in mind, but also, and we've talked about sound, we've got to talk about movement and touch as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things is that sort of broke down in the early days of VR was this kind of dream that we could leave, this dystopian dream that we could leave our bodies behind. But actually, I think now we're building with body in mind, and this idea that you can touch and you can interact, and I think as long as we remember that, we're aware of that when we're building stuff. I think that's much more.
I think the same as you. The fact that the player isn't a player. The story is their story, because the characters are talking directly to you, and you're there, and it's a totally different feeling to watching someone else, or even reading a book in the first person. Like that's interesting, but again, I'm looking at the words on a page. When you're in virtual reality, like that, everything. This is your new world. It doesn't matter what's going on outside. Again, as long as you get over that threshold to buy in, and you're not me, and you're doing all this dumb stuff. Like once you're over that, like this is my story. I am in London. I am a gangster now, and I'm going to be the coolest goddamn gangster there is, and I'm going to shoot all the bad guys, and I'm going to be the best. And that's me being that. It's not me controlling the character, making that happen. It's like this is me, and that is such a weird and fantastic experience, because the achievements that you've done in the game kind of become your achievements. Well, they are your achievements because you're doing them, but even if they're like superhuman achievements, like accurately shooting a gun, it's yours. And I don't want to get into this right now, but that becomes like your memory. And this is something I did. It's not I watched the movie and I saw this guy do it. I did this, and 40 years time, I remember that time I was a gangster. Like that. Who knows what's going to happen there? But these are things that are happening to you. I keep saying this, but that's what it is. That the story is your story.
Yeah.
So one of the things, I agree with what you're saying, but there's very much like the language you're using is I, me, and it's all about that first person.
Yeah.
And it's how do we bring the other into these worlds as well, and that's where the next step in narrative is really going to be, I think, because at the moment we're building for us, the individuals, and you want this person to experience this story that you've created, but actually can we experience that story with someone else? And the idea of the asynchronous, I've seen another one like that, so I love the idea of it. I'd like to play the game, but so those are starting to happen where you've got one maybe on a keyboard and one in a headset, but actually now we're thinking about like social VR and how to be in the same space, in the same room, in the same space, in the same virtual space together. That's where the next some more interesting things will come as well. But we're not there yet.
It seems like that's going to throw up even more complications in terms of you've got two people looking the wrong way. Is that? Yeah. But I agree that the social aspect is perhaps missing at the moment a little bit. So, Chris mentioned something there, comparing the immersion in a VR experience to being immersed in a book, and that's something that some of us have talked about and what the difference is. And some people will say to me, "Yeah, you can get immersed in a book; it's just the same thing." Why is it different? Chris has kind of picked up on this a little bit already, but is it, any other thoughts?
Maybe I've not got a great imagination, so it's easier when I see it. I think it's because you can't escape, or you can't escape by taking the headset off. But like, there's a conscious decision to do that, to escape from virtual reality. And if you don't do that, then you'll leave. You're in that world. There's a horror game that came out a long time ago, around about the start of VR. And in the game, you sit on the couch, and you get a controller, and you play a game on the TV. So you're playing a game in the game, and then something happens in there. It's like a dark living room, and a bad guy comes from behind you, and people don't know how to react to that because they stop playing the game, but they're still in virtual reality, and so this thing here is like one level of Inception deep. So they believe that this person that's appeared beside them is real because they've stopped doing the thing they were doing. Even though the thing they were doing was not a real thing, and they can't escape. They can escape, but they don't immediately think, take this off. They think, I'll stop playing the game, and having that sort of thing. I think that's part of where the immersion is that you, because it's so all-encompassing, you forget that you're inside an experience.
Okay. Anything to add to that?
I think in terms of reading a book, a well-written story takes you on a journey. You go, your imagination kicks in, and you start to put voices to the characters. You start to, it describes a sound, you hear that sound, right? And it's a particular level of depth that I think is wonderful and we will enjoy. However, imagine the same kind of level of experience, but the depth increases by the fact that in a virtual reality experience, you've got all those elements plus some, in the sense that you hear a sound behind you or over there, and things are more likely to surprise you, and it's kind of that sense of authorship in terms of like the beats of the story, kind of you're directing them. You're more of a director in that sense. Whereas a book, you are doing, page by page by page. There's a sense of direction, but it's very linear. Whereas in a virtual reality experience, a real-time one, that flexibility to actually to just pause in a moment and let it be around you. So if you are kind of a gangster in this kind of particular setting, and you're going to go off, you're going to go sort something out, sort out some problem down the pub or whatever. But before you do all that, you're stuck at home, and the television's buzzing or something, and there's flies in the kitchen. All those kind of extra elements that kind of make it a lot more atmospheric, basically. And I think that level of freedom is going to be it makes it more accessible to more people. Because I think not everyone likes reading books. You know what I mean? It's some people it doesn't work for them. So whereas I think if you offer them something like VR, it's just another medium whereby I think it can attract even bigger audiences ultimately. So yeah, it's a depth for me that's slightly different.
Any thoughts on that stuff? Is it different from a book? Is it different from being immersed? Is it?
I think the thing with a book for me is that I get immersed into a book because I'm essentially creative. So it's kind of, as you were saying, like the sounds, the descriptions of the sounds that you hear is completely unique to me. Yeah. And I think maybe in VR we don't necessarily get that, because it's like watching a Harry Potter film versus reading a Harry Potter book, right? When you read it, you don't know what this character looks like, so therefore you build up an image. So I think they kind of differ in that way. But I think the thing that we're kind of talking about here is creating stories within stories, and that's in a way that's kind of Inception. It's that because you're so immersed in that thing that's happening over there, you're creating layers of immersion, and you can play with that. You can have really good fun with that, because you can script something, your story, to pull the player back out of that layer, to shock them back out of it, and yeah, it's really interesting. We had a guy working on the London Heist, and he was amazed. Which is probably, it's not even just a story within a story. He was in the van just doing just shooting some guys up. But he was like he'd opened the glove box and was in there just playing around with stuff, and that was his. It wasn't a story that we'd created, but it was a story that he'd created. And then he was so shocked when he stood back from that, because he just realised, oh God, what am I doing? Like, I'm supposed to be shooting these guys. But yeah, so that was his own kind of story within a story, and I think that for me is the really powerful thing about VR, is that you can sit within this much bigger story that's kind of controlled, but you begin to create your own small story. So I guess that's what you were saying earlier about, that's your thing, you did that, and that's why I think it's unique to.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely one of the powerful things about it. Is like, books are not worse than VR, and VR is not better than films or whatever. It's like a different thing completely. But I think to me that gets the crux of it, is that VR is you can sort of go away and do your own little thing. Even as the story's going on, you might be super interested in the way that the bricks look or something. Just super simple, what's in the glove compartment, which you can't do in a book. But I guess it's the same thing. It's like, this is my experience. It's not the authored experience. Even though there is an authored experience, I'm like somewhere underneath that, just away because I can.
Kind of emergent behaviour, really, and just when you're lost in a virtual environment and you come across some emergent behaviour and start making stuff up, it's really playful and fun. I remember early days in Garden. team members, guys, we had seeds that you'd collect. And tactile behavior is really fun in VR, right? You just pick these things up, and he had a bucket, and just literally picking a thing up and putting it in a bucket that was tied around you was just so much fun. And that was, it was just literally picking a thing up, going around and just collecting things, putting in a bucket, and then having the bucket like expand, shrink, you can flip it and stuff. It was just so much fun. That was like the most fun we've had, ever in any game we made. A random bucket, and it was just like a cylinder. I mean, that's what it was.
I'm gonna get you a bucket for your birthday.
So we in Blood and Truth we've got, it's the most random thing ever. We've just got a bin,
right,
with a net on it,
yeah,
and paper balls.
Yeah.
And we made it just for a laugh. We were just like, it gives someone something to do. But people get there and they will spend so long just trying to get this thing in. And we observe people doing it. We were like, right, okay, well, let's make it flash when it goes in.
Yeah.
So then they've got a sense of achievement, and then I think we turned it into a trophy at the end.
Yeah, nice.
But yeah, it's like those small little things that you just don't think.
Yeah.
Like, will hold someone's attention.
You're not going to get that in Harry Potter.
Mal touched on the idea that VR might reach a wider audience, but something I wanted to talk about a little bit was accessibility. Certainly in education there's a big push or a lot of interest in using VR for educational purposes, but I am concerned about, does that exclude people, or Rhoda, do you have any thoughts on that maybe?
So this is actually something that's actually dear to my heart. So one of the things that came up, Al was mentioning there about not everyone being able to read. So I use an e-reader, and I know that a lot of VR experiences, they're not accessible at the moment, like some of the games. In terms of reading text, it's no. So that's one of the things. But also, when I try and build things, I try and build things with a very universal application. So that might be in terms of can people of different sizes use this? Can someone with a wheelchair use this? And the latest piece that I'm working on at the moment is actually building primarily for wheelchair users, but trying to make it something that everyone can use. So the idea is making a sculpture park, and I'm working on the mechanics of how you can move around sculptures to make this sculpture park. The idea is that these are artworks that are relating to climate change, and the idea is that this people that can't necessarily get into the countryside very easily because they're wheelchair based. It's a way of starting a conversation about climate change. So that's the brief. What I'm having to do is build a mechanism to move in VR for people who maybe have limited strength in their head or limited movement in their head. So they may have to move the whole wheelchair in order to move their gaze, in order to then use maybe one button, because that may be all that they can operate in order to pick something up and then to move it around a space. So it's very experimental, and because I don't have that lived experience, I'm working with, so I've been set the brief. I've been talking to someone who works with people with cerebral palsy, initially making something, and then they will help me with the design. So I'll be using testing it frequently with users, and then also making sure that it works for everyone, that it's something that is enjoyable by, or meaningful for everyone, not just the target audience, to sort of give a very universal design. But I think that's the way we need to be thinking with the more we can involve different users, the more we can make for different users.
Any other thoughts on that, on the accessibility of VR? Is it something you think about? Is it something we should be thinking about?
It's definitely something we should be thinking about. I don't think anything I've actually worked on has been particularly accessible. We've not made a point of it really. But I think because VR is you're in a different world, so you can bend the rules to make things more accessible. Like you can make it so a person who can't turn their head can turn their head in VR. Or a person who can only press a button, can't even press a button, can only blink, can interact with the real world or our world of sorts in a way that they couldn't before. I've seen it's not, I don't know what it is, but it's like a virtual reality experience for dementia patients. where in real world, a dementia patient probably shouldn't operate a toaster because it's like incredibly dangerous. They walk away and they forget about it and the house is burned out, for example. But in VR, they can go and they can cook the dinner, they can make spaghetti, they can do stuff like that, and it's making our world more accessible to them. It's not necessarily making VR making an accessible concept, accessible thing about VR, but it's making something more accessible to people than it is in the real world, which is maybe a slightly different topic to what you're talking about. But I think that's a real positive thing that VR does, is that people can, again, I'm not disabled in any particular way, so I can't comment on how good it is or how possible it is to do these things. But it seems to me that there's a real wealth of opportunity there that we can help people, and use.
I think the strength of VR, you kind of mentioned earlier about the depth of narrative and story, and it means that we can tell new stories in interesting ways and reach a lot more people. And reality is it's quite the level of empathy that you can create through a VR experience is quite, you can get empathy fairly quickly if done right. So on one hand, you've got that opportunity in terms of accessibility, telling a variety of different stories from different perspectives, which is very, very important, and enabling people to do things that maybe not able to do. But I think fundamentally for us, when it comes to VR technology, the biggest issue at hand right now is VR in its own right as a platform, as a technology, is not accessible. It's still way too expensive. It's still a price point that's not quite right. And even in terms of a good consumer product, it's still not quite there yet, So you still have people who kind of jump in who are the early adopters in terms of technology. You've got artists and makers and game makers who are jumping in, but it hasn't quite hit the mass market yet. But we're getting there as the technology improves. And in a way, the content will help drive that as well, I think. The more that we as game makers and artists are able to kind of make the content more accessible and more diverse, the more hopefully that will come through into technology and hopefully be open to more people. Because right now it's still not there. It's still way too early. We don't have the numbers yet, and because fundamentally the technology isn't quite ready yet, but it is getting ready all the time.
So looking to the future, before I open it up to the floor, but looking to the future, what do you think is next for VR? What are the opportunities for telling more stories as the technology improves and so on? Where do you think we're going? What are you working on, John?
I'd love to be able to tell you. I don't think it's necessarily about the technology, but I think one thing that's becoming quite apparent is that people are beginning to tell stories from different perspectives, and there's some examples out there of people telling stories from multiple perspectives at the same time, which is odd. So if you take Trover, I don't know if anyone's played Trover Saves the Universe at all. Completely out there. For me, it's great. I love the humour, but I think the really interesting thing about it is that I'm a character in a world, and I'm acknowledged as a character. So therefore, it's a first-person game. But I am controlling a character from a third-person perspective, and I think that's super interesting. And I don't think, I think we've touched on that a little bit with games, but I think you're always, I don't know. It's just something about being that up close and being a character, controlling a character within that world. I think is really interesting, and I think we could have done that ages ago, absolutely ages ago. But I think that VR's come along and it's kind of inspired us to start creating. It's made us think differently, so therefore we're exploring storytelling more.
What do you guys see on the horizon? Where are we going?
Well, I think I sort of said about having multiple people in the same experience. I think that's where I'd like to see it.
I guess for me, the thing I'm most looking forward to is the blending of VR and AR and mixing those two things together, whatever it's going to be in the future, where the technology is accessible enough to be just anywhere and everywhere, and at the same time for it to get to a point where we can have the fun that you were talking about, kind of interesting ways to tell stories and stuff. Once the tech stuff's out of the way, then we can really focus on being creative and creating a shared experience, for example, because that's not easy, as you alluded to earlier. At some point, we're gonna there'll be VR or X or whatever kind of experiences that maybe are experienced by a stadium full of people, for example. Thousands of people experiencing the same thing at the same time. So that's the stuff that's really kind of way down the road, going to be really fascinating. Like this kind of shared experience stuff is quite interesting, because I think that's, once we figure that out, I think that's going to open up to more people. So yeah, cool.
I will agree. Like, I think the shared experience thing is going to be huge whenever it happens. And it's another one of these, why has it never really happened before? You can have multiple people playing a PC game or console game together and have a co-op game, but there's so few things that are all about experiencing a story together. And it feels like there should be hundreds of them, thousands of them, but there isn't. Like, imagine you could play like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe with 3 other friends, and you're these children, you go through. Why has no one done that? Like, it's not impossible without VR. Like, you could do it. You could all read a book together. Like, everyone's got a different part, and they can read it together. But it's not a common thing. I'm sure there's like little bits here and little bits there. But I think that because VR has this sort of, it tells such powerful stories. It has the potential to tell such powerful stories. And like, network games are more and more of a thing that, yeah, of course it's going to go there. It's going to be fantastic. The other thing I'm looking forward to is what I was alluding to earlier, is like characters that react to how you behave to them, instead of just playing their prescriptive part. I'm sure it'll be prescriptive, but if you're at a live action theatre and you do something, like, that actor can respond to you. And when computer actors, computer actors can respond to you, that would just be like another one of these levels of immersion.
Great. I think at that point we'll take some questions from the audience. If you guys are struggling to hear, there's still a couple of seats up at the front here if you're feeling brave. But are there any questions for the panel? We'll start here and work our way across. Yes.
Thank you very much. This is really interesting. I'm a linguist based here at the University of Glasgow, and I've experienced a couple of VR immersive experiences. One of them was a fantastic Björk show, which she had on in various places in Europe. That was very visual. But with my linguistic interest, I would be interested in how VR can navigate the linguistic landscape. So, for instance, is there any awareness, is there any appetite to represent linguistic diversity? You were talking about storytelling, you were talking about accessibility, bringing people together. Are we happy with telling a kind of creative story on the visual level and in terms of the events that occur, but are we happy with giving people just a single voice, for example? Or is there any experimental thinking going on in that direction? Or how do you see the role of language and the representation of language as such, the kind of stuff that we can do in VR?
There's an easy question to start with.
Well, I know there are some pieces, some artists working on poetry in VR, there's Laurie Anderson's ones, obviously, where but it's the poetry written out, and that doesn't make it very accessible. There is a PhD student, Ellis in Dundee, you might want to speak to. She does sound walks and creating soundscapes. I don't know whether they're language based or some of her stuff's word based, some of it's just sounds taken from cityscapes. And there's a woman based in Berlin who I will find a name for, but there are people experimenting that area definitely, but it's but it's something we were all talking about just before, actually, about sound being an expert.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, in the art world, there's a lot more experimentation happening. When it comes to kind of games, what normally happens is just for any kind of language concept, just for that side of it alone, it's very much like things that are generally done in English in the West, for example, and what happens then. Yeah, in a very particular way, and there's like oh, now I've got to get this out in different markets, and there's particular categories, particular regions that are the ones that you do, and you don't do it everywhere else. So it's early days in that sense. It's very commercially minded. It's still, I guess, once the platform is a lot more stable and there's a lot less kind of fluidity, at that point there's going to be a lot more experimentation and fun being had with music, for example. There's so many opportunities there. Really, there's so many that we haven't yet tackled that. It's just early days. There's going to be some amazing work in that sphere.
Just out of interest, John, how is multilingual stuff handled in Blood and Truth? Is it subtitles or dubs or?
So we do subtitles, and you can change the language as well. So yeah, we're very aware that when we want the best performance that we can from all of our languages. So we work really hard to kind of ensure that whenever we're localising our stuff, that that our timings are bang on, and that we're not basically we're trying to do everything as well as we can for all audiences, which is a pretty tricky thing to do, but yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And I think if you so I personally struggle to watch say a foreign film with dubbing, especially if the dubbing is really bad. It kind of really puts me off, and I think when you're in VR as well, I think if you start getting that kind of sense, I think it's really difficult. So I think there's definitely some work to do in order to make that better. But then I that's the beauty of working with games, is that you can develop systems that can actually help with that. So I think, but again, I still think it's something that we need to work much harder on.
I'd say things have got a lot better. I'm thinking, those of you who are old enough to remember, we used to get games really late in Europe, and the excuse was you had to translate it into all the different European languages. But that doesn't. Things come out the door with multiple languages in them. I know.
Yeah, and a lot more as well.
Yeah. Sorry, you were next. Yes.
Can I just ask that everyone speak louder? It's incredibly difficult to hear.
Not your problem. My grand says I'm way too loud. So I was just thinking about the storytelling in like regular game narrative and VR, and it got me thinking about releases by the Chinese Room Studio. The people that did it, the Arrestor, and everybody's gone to the Rapture, very environmental-based games. And when I did my dissertation, I was studying them a bit, and I looked at the reviews, and people were saying this isn't a game. I was like, that's a very strong statement. These are not VR games, these are regular games. And I was thinking environmental. I was like, oh, make it VR, then no one will complain because that's what it's made for. So I was thinking, does VR have a place in that discourse, or do you guys see it as people screaming into the void about what constitutes a game or not? Sorry.
No, it did. I think there will always be someone who's going to argue that it's not a game. There will always be that voice. And I think that's fair enough. You can have that opinion. You're wrong, but you can have that opinion. I think a lot of things that I've made as a game maker has been quite experiential, and some things gone into the kind of physical world. And quite often, people say it's not a game. We made a game called Killbox, and it's on Steam. And if you go to Steam and see the reviews and what people do, all sorts of opinions, right? You're never going to get away from that, and that's fine. I think if you're challenging the medium and you're starting that conversation, you're doing the right thing. So I think VR is interesting because on some level, because it's so technology based, people think it's a game automatically because you're doing so with technology. Actually, most of the VR stuff is very experiential, so it's redefining what it is to be a game all over again, which I think is very healthy for the medium overall.
I think right now in VR, it's kind of a good place because it's so young and there are so many experiential things that, on one hand, consumers are just happy to get anything to play, so that's great, so they don't care so much if it's a game or not, they've got their opinions. But it's kind of setting the stage for what VR is and what is possible. So if in like 10 years' time when someone's got enough money to make e-rester in VR or do something like that, people won't go, oh, that's not a game. They'll go, this is just a VR thing. And it will stand alongside everything else. At the Oculus conference last week, John Carmack mentioned in his talk that there's a Star Wars experience, I guess, that came out with Quest, where you're like Darth Vader's apprentice, and a lot of people complain that it's a really light on gameplay. Like there's a bit where you can wave a lightsaber about and fight a robot, and the rest of it's all kind of just like walk through this, climb up the ladder. Lots of people complained because they were expecting a Star Wars game, can't wait to fight robots. But John Carmack's saying it's great that this exists, because he got to some bit of it and he just sat on the floor and like looked at the lava that's coming out of the volcano or whatever. And that was like a totally legitimate thing to do in this game, in this experience. And it wasn't a problem, it was just, I can do this and it's fine, and I've got, the game's not pushing me on to get to the next bit, I've got time to sit and relax, and that's okay. And I think that's good.
I really like to start experiencing things with games. That's why I'm so excited about VR being like particularly for that in a way. So it's like, oh yes, people will get me for this because I meant to do this in VR. So yeah, it's quite nice.
Cool. Sorry, Rhoda, yeah.
I think games have often been made by one type of person for one type of audience, and so as soon as we get more diversity in the people making experiences and games, then have a bigger diversity enjoying them. I think that's a known thing, and yes, I know. I've come to understanding about games very late, very recently, and I seem to know all of the alternative canon, including things like the rest, and they seem to me to be what I think games are. And then I realise actually there's all these AAA games that are what games are really meant to or have always been before, and I think there's that conflict, and it's just a pushback. So I would ignore those comments and just write your own and make it. Yes, it is a game. I enjoy it, therefore it's a game.
We had a quite an interesting time in VR worlds. So coming from designing other students that weren't necessarily dealing with VR, we would always hear gameplay is king, which I suggest is wrong anyway, because you're putting one thing against audio or anything. But I think and we kind of did have some elements of that when we first started up in VR. It wasn't a thing that we took on as a studio, but it was certainly a thing I tackled myself. And a few other people did, where we were actually talking much more about the experience is king, because the gameplay is just a part of that that sits with everything else. And I think that's incredibly important to remember for VR, and also for just traditional games as well. There's more to it than just the gameplay.
Thank you so much. That's very nice.
Another question? Yep, and then Tim.
It's a bit like the same question almost, but more about how plot can figure into a narrative. Because, for example, when we talked before about the bucket, that was really interesting to make me think about like games like Sims, for example, that have no point in themselves whatsoever, but you can play them for hours. And then also this video I was watching where the BBC was releasing this Doctor Who game they had made, and these were all people who had worked in TV and film before, and they were really sorry about the way that they were not able to include gameplay in it, but they were more focused on plot. So I guess my question is, like, especially with film and TV, is there space for plot-based narratives in VR at all, or is it mainly made to be more like Sims, for example, where it is just more exploration?
So, I mean, Blood and Truth, we have a writing team on that. We have a plot. We take story very, very seriously, and we work with actors, and with our cast, it's something we do. I think it's just getting your balance right, but I think it comes down to the type of experience that you want to create, and that was kind of how we just wanted to tackle it. So absolutely, I think there's space in VR for everything really in terms of games.
Right. Job done. Tim.
Well, many thanks. It's a fantastic panel, and I'm a lecturer in history, and I'm also sort of really interested in VR from that perspective, as well as a co-director of the new Games and Gaming Lab along with Matt. And something I'm curious about is the discussion of thresholds and the point at which people lose themselves in this virtual world, and particularly in the future, we're already seeing some of the implications of people becoming lost in video gaming and the whole issues arising over the differences between reality and gaming and gamifying reality. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are as to how we perhaps address some of those implications in the future when we reach that level of immersion, when you start to lose that, or if it's possible to lose that connection, and what the implications are there, particularly if you're doing historical reconstructions to the point at which, you know, what is the effect of that on your perception of reality of that? I don't know if that's maybe a little more sort of sci-fi, but...
I think the first thing to acknowledge is the fact that when you're experiencing something in virtual reality, you are experiencing a real experience. And if we can start from that premise, then you're building, knowing that that person's reality is what they're seeing in the headset, and to not make light of it as something unreal. It is, they are experiencing, they are seeing it, is their lived experience, albeit their lived experience in a headset, and we start from that point.
I think yeah, if you kind of start connecting the dots and seeing where this could go in terms of, you know, realism and AI as we think it could be, we're going to get to a point where it's the holodeck thing, right? You press a button and you are whatever you want, wherever you want to be, and you're going to experience whatever you want to experience. And I think as a society we are going to have to look at the consequences of that, because I remember watching a documentary about someone's struggle with loss. They lost a parent, and it was someone in the kind of tech industry, and the loss of one of their parents was so tragic for them. They tried their best to kind of collect as much data on their parents as possible in terms of their creative output, their writing, audio recordings, in the hope of recreating their parent in the future in a kind of a virtual kind of construct. And that just made me think about the kind of the potential possibilities of that in the future, and how we're going to have to explore some really interesting areas about life and meaning, all that kind of stuff, because in a way, we're going to empower people to kind of almost do whatever they want without any limitations in a virtual kind of reality world. And I think it's very early days, so we're not sure what all these challenges are, but we are going to have to face some interesting challenges. To a certain extent, gaming in its own right now, like any form of media and entertainment, always gets questioned about addiction, all that kind of stuff. So we're already facing challenges as things stand. So it's going to be quite intriguing and interesting. And I think I think the best way forward is just to make sure that we have quite a holistic approach to the creative process, and we make sure we bring in as many diverse people into the making process, so that what we create is we need to give people more options, so it's not just one thing or the other. I'm not sure if I answered that at all. It's kind of gone off on one. But that's the kind of thing I think about all the time, honestly, is like where we're going and where this could lead. And it doesn't all have to be Black Mirror. There are other possibilities out there that could be a lot more positive. Yeah.
With a question here, and then we'll come over here. Yep.
Okay, no, it's actually following on from that almost. So looking at virtual reality, but the reality bit, and you were talking about Noni de la Peña before. So virtual reality and its potential for telling documentary stories. And by the way, from cultural policies, and this is where this is coming from. I used to make documentaries myself before becoming an academic. So if I made a documentary that was really impactful, as VR no doubt can do, in a TV medium, and I told lies, or I was making a deep fake or whatever, people can complain to Ofcom, whereas there isn't really any recourse in terms of VR. There's a PEGI rating, but so I'm just wondering whether you feel that there should be some sort of body that regulates what can be told, or where you can, whether there's a recourse for these narratives that could be very impactful in a documentary sense.
Who's going to step up to that one?
I think It's impossible probably to have a central place. Like even with television and film, you can complain to Ofcom, but you could also go home right now and make a video and put it on YouTube, and Ofcom aren't going to say anything about that, and it could get hundreds of thousands of hits. It could be like a viral sensation on Facebook, and the result would be the same, but no one could complain. And I think this comes back to another question as well, that technology, all the sort of sphere of technology has this sort of these things to think about. Exactly what you're saying now. I don't really know where I'm going with this. I'm just going to go off on one. And we as an industry, as humanity, have to work out what that is. And we can't, I'm not helping because I've not really done anything about it myself, but we can't just keep ignoring the fact that there's all these problems, not just on the horizon, but right here, right now. There's a lot of talk that computing science students should have mandatory ethics classes, because they go off and they work on Facebook and they're like, this is a totally fine thing for me to do, and it's like, well, hang on, you work on Facebook. And there's just like lots and lots of questions which nobody's even tried to answer, and they just get answered by people doing the job and like, what's the fastest way to get this done? That's it done, I can forget about it now, and they have real world implications. And yeah, there's no one to complain to, there's no central body. The most central body that you could complain about any of these things is the government of a country. But which country? Because now it's all over the world. So yeah, I think it's important that there's a way to like react to these and get the message back out to say, well, no, this is not true. But what that looks like and how to manage it, I have no idea.
But if there's no central government or central body for us to complain to, then isn't it our responsibility of each individual to call out injustices when they see it? And like there was a video game recently, I can't remember the name of it. It was one that was very violent. You could go and basically attack, I think, rape and murder women, and it was going to be released on Steam, but then it didn't. Not because it was deemed an inappropriate game, but because of the backlash they received, and they thought it was gonna endanger sales. And it wasn't, which is outrageous in its own way, but it took people going, this isn't right, and fighting back, and it was thousands of voices fighting back. I think that's what we need to do. It's not really an answer, but it is. I think it's everyone's responsibility, not just a government body.
We're gonna go here, and we're gonna go there, and then we're gonna go to Gareth. I've got a plan.
I suppose following on from those points, I'm interested in what good practice or areas of good practice you think there could be around when you interact with other forms of drama, whether it be radio, TV, films. Quite often those captions before and after about if you've experienced trauma around this kind of illness, or you've experienced trauma or violence or abuse, there's some kind of support you can get afterwards. You know, you're signposted to some other form of where that you might get help if it's brought up issues for you. And I think I was really intrigued when you were talking so much about empathy, and the example that you gave really early on about domestic violence and empathy. And I thought, what do you think you could do in terms of taking all your skills and this technology and putting it in a different kind of environment, so it's not about a commercial entertainment or experiential learning that's in that kind of entertainment sphere, but how you could take it into a counselling sphere, how you could take it into a health and well-being sphere, you know, where people are able to experience other people's points of view at a point where we have really polarised dialogue. What opportunities are there using these tools to look at dialogue and different perspectives that are more helpful at a point where it feels like communication is so difficult and people are dealing with a lot of trauma at the moment in terms of where we're going. I don't know if that went off on one too, sorry.
I would say, focusing on the point for people making the pieces now, in that case, was it independent artists making that, or were they making it for someone?
Definitely independent, yeah.
So I think if you're making something as an artist and you're making it, then the responsibility is obviously on you to then, if you think that there's going to be a trigger warning. And in most galleries, you do put up things to say this contains violence, this contains, you know, there's a sort of mechanism already in the art world. If you're doing it because you've been commissioned to make a piece, so I remember trying out one that was supposed to be autism in it was in a shopping centre, and it was one of the charities, and it was showing how you could put this on and it would show the sort of some of the hallucinations you could get with autism and the overwhelmingness of the sensory overload. And I thought that was very interesting. But that's a charity paying someone to make something that's in virtual reality in order to, so they're there at the moment of doing it. How that works in other industries, it will be industry specific, I think, a lot of the time. I
suppose it's just that thought of where you can move into different kinds of markets, because you've got an amazing set of skills. I have to say I've been absolutely petrified and equally elated by the things you've been saying. You know, I kind of think there's spheres that these skills could go into that, why aren't they being used in those kind of healthcare settings? Or why is it always this amazing set of skills that you have is put in that commercial entertainment space and it's exploring narrative elsewhere?
We're coming down to money. I mean, I've gone back into academia because I couldn't, the stuff that I was making, no one would pay me to make. So I've gone back into academia in order to be able to make interesting pieces that I want to be able to make and have that freedom. But there was no, you know, it comes down to money, and everyone's got to make a living in the end. And I'm sorry to be I'm blunt about. I think some of.
Sorry to jump in. I don't make games for money. I understand that games are sold for profit, and that's what I do get paid, because I need to get paid to eat. I do it because I want to entertain people, and I get a kick out of that. So if I see someone playing a game that I've made, or I see a reaction on a YouTube video or anything, I get a real kick out of that, because entertainment is important for me. To be able to take people through emotional journeys is personally for me really important. So. It's not necessarily about money. I think I could use a lot of the skill sets that I've acquired over the last 15 years to go out and earn a lot more money. But actually, I choose to do games because I love it. But yeah, I agree. I think you could still kind of perhaps I mean, it is important. It's not just for games.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to say that what I was trying to make the point is that people do need to eat, and if some of these things you want to do, they would be great, and there are a lot of the research in order to see how it's going to help people in healthcare and stuff, they're coming from the universities, because they're the people that can get the grants in order to do it, and that's what I meant by it comes down to, it's not that we're, I'm not saying bad people because they want to make games and entertain people. I'm just saying there's the reality of how we operate.
I do love the idea of a dementia-suffering gangster using blood and truth to recuperate at some point. Anyway, sorry, we didn't there.
I think there's, again, I make games because I want to make games. That's always been my dream. But I think that we're now the state of the industry, the game industry in particular, is great. That if you want to make some sort of experience to help people see some other point of view, the tools that we use to make video games are so accessible now that it's possible for someone who's never made a video game to use those same tools and very quickly produce something that's totally competent and usable and sellable if you want to sell it, but will do what you want to do. If you're, say, an archaeologist who wants to show what it's like to be at a dig and what that building used to look like, previously you would have to have hired a company for millions of pounds to do that for you. Whereas now you can go get a Unity license for free, spend like a month learning it, and just do it yourself. So I think that hopefully we'll find that more and more people who don't just want to make video games will pick up the equipment, pick up the tools, and will be able to do it, and we'll see more and more of this.
I think the whole cost thing is fundamentally down to, I think we were commissioned by Dundee as a UNESCO City of Design last year to represent the city at the London Design Biennale, and it was in conjunction with working with young people and tackling the subject matter of mental health specifically for young people. So we took our VR game actually to a youth session, and you know, a bunch of young people played it. Great, we packed up and went. When we spoke to the youth workers, they were like, actually, there was 2 teenage girls that played your game, and they'd been coming here for months. And what was interesting is after playing your game, they were a lot more vocal and they were a lot more interested to ask questions, which they'd never previously done. And I was like, cool. And as game makers, we tend to find that a lot of our work is quite engaging, is very empowering, and it does that and does it really well. And so they were like, great, we want that, but for this particular, you know, showcase. And we're like, yeah, but that costs a lot of money. And the budgets were simply, it was just impossible for us to be able to recreate that for that context with the budget available. So we had to come up with something entirely different. In fact, we did something that was like, you know, a custom controller, a projector. We filled the space as a virtual environment without using headsets. So we came up with something that was quite interesting, but in the grand scheme of things, there is definitely a kind of a misunderstanding outside of the games and technology sphere about how much money and this stuff costs, unfortunately. And I think the reality is, if you get it right, it can be incredibly impactful and have amazing impact in terms of health or a whole host of different kind of sectors and spheres. But not enough people are taking those risks. You know, I think we as an industry, we are quite siloed, and we're kind of busy making our games and doing our thing because it's really hard to make these games, so it's very easy for us to kind of be in our own little world. But likewise, beyond us, there's not enough kind of intrigue in people asking us questions. So I think more people need to come to games as a medium and ask questions, and come to it with a kind of understanding of what it takes to do what we do, essentially.
You're right in terms of that budget disparity.
Yeah, unfortunately, it can come down to that. It's not necessarily always the case, and you're right, sometimes you can do things, you know, with a small team, a small budget, but you have to then realign your scope and what it's, you know, what it's going to be, right? So it's a reality check to some extent. Yeah.
Back here.
Hi, I'm from philosophy, but I'm really just asking a question as a female gamer. I can call myself that. I can flag. So games historically haven't treated women very well. You know, characters in games, but especially on online social spaces. So thinking about accessibility, thinking about the fact that games are VR is experiential, that it's immersive. Are there dangers going forward in terms of making spaces that are actually quite inaccessible, because once you get other people in a world interacting with you in ways that they want to interact with you, could we just see a continuation of some of the negative online behaviour that we see, or the negative kind of stereotypes that have been built into games?
Okay, so I got asked to look at doing a social VR piece by a journalist who wanted to use models to explain scientific engagement, public engagement of science, basically. It's still sort of pending, but one of the things we were looking at was looking at the existing platforms of social VR, and you've got Altspace, which is pretty geeky, and then you have VR chat, which is exactly, I went in there and I did not want to stay. Yes, you've got a lot more options in terms of the characters you can, you know, your avatars, but there was some quite inappropriate behaviour, and I was like, if you want to use that space, I am not involved. If you want to use Altspace or somewhere like that, I'm happy to do this. You've got limited avatars, but you know that's okay, because you've got a much different audience. So I think some of it is self-selecting on the type of platforms, but yeah, there are places that are still very toxic. But then how do you deal with that? And but in VR chat, as you go between the sort of levels and the spaces, it even says please be respectful to people, and the fact that it needs to say that tells you a lot about the audience that use it, or the users in that space, whereas Altspace doesn't have any of that kind of thing. So I think it's about building places that we want to inhabit.
Do you think it's good though for, if that place is for a particular kind of group of toxic people, like some particular message boards we can mention, is it a good place to have that containment for that kind of behaviour for people that want to experience it?
It's suppose if you go in there knowing what you're going into, that's fine. It's like going into in a city. If you want to go to a club and you want to behave like that, then that's your choice. You're choosing to go into that space. But it's if you go there knowing what it is and then get offended, then there's a bit of that. I think it needs to be properly, you know, you need to know what you're going into. I'm all for freedom and stuff, but yeah, that's not the space I wanted to be in.
Gareth.
So, John, I was taken with your description of the person rustling around in the glove compartment while playing an action-packed game. I think I might have found my kindred spirit there. So it's always how I seem to end up playing games and missing everything that's going on. But I was sort of struck when you said that by the level of detail that must be required when designing and building VR games. The level of detail in the environment, because people behave completely differently than they might on a screen-based game. And I was wondering if that's changed the role of the environment artist in the production process, and so whether you're seeing a shift there in the way that games are sort of team built.
We're having to be a lot more collaborative. I think kind of going back to your point earlier about, you know, kind of reaching out and wanting to be able to touch characters as well. That's something you've got to deal with. If you're going to put someone close up, then you know you've got to try and deal with that. We've tried to deal with that a few times, but also it's the same thing with the environments, right? It's like if you see a door handle in VR, you expect that you can reach out, grab that door handle, and then you expect that door to open. Which I would probably lock it because, you know, we haven't got the budget to do anything beyond it. Yeah, but we're having to collaborate a lot more, and we're really having to question things. And it's almost like you have to do passes over things constantly, and you know, you spot the bigger problems, and then it comes, you know, you figure them out with your team, and then you're like, oh no, now I really kind of want to do that. I think like it's that, and it's also you have to put yourself in the role of the player a lot more. You have to step back and you have to sit there and say, what do I expect, and how do we as developers meet those expectations? But the tricky balance is how far do you go, because the more that you do, the more that the player expects. The more that eats into your budget and your time, and then it gets more tricky. And it's the same with the character thing as well. I think as gamers, like I think gamers are actually, I think they can try to do something, and if you just ignore it, sometimes they'll step back and go, "That's great, okay, I get that." So gamers test, and they constantly test and test and test you, and there is a danger that the more you react to a character, like you were saying in that example, the more they expect. And the more they expect, the minute you don't meet those expectations, the more chance that you have of damaging any sense of presence or immersion in the world.
So you have to be consistent and sort of establish those rules early on.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I think finding that balance is very tricky, and you could go wherever. Like if you've got your game and in the game there's a coffee cup and you can pick it up because it's a coffee cup, why can you pick it up? Then what if there's a coffee machine? You should be able to put the coffee cup in the coffee machine. And then if there's a coffee machine, there must be water, and then there must be milk to put in it. They must mix together, and then you're writing a world simulator.
This is my kind of game.
And that's it very quickly goes out of scope. So yeah, you have to make decisions about what's important for the story and what's important to keep the immersion real. If you're standing in front of a desk and there's a coffee cup, you expect to be able to pick up a coffee cup. If you can, that's going to pull you out of the immersion. But yeah, you have to draw the line somewhere because it's literally impossible to do.
Got a question from Rachel here.
Yeah, I think leading on hopefully fairly directly from that, I feel like maybe one of the differences with VR in particular is you're kind of mixing talking about this as making games and then talking about it as making worlds, and you're kind of saying, okay, one of the difficulties in VR is that it pushes us into a position of having to make a whole world rather than having to make a kind of constrained game. And so I'd be interested in if you think that VR necessitates building a world rather than building a game, and if maybe that's where a lot of this is coming from in terms of that we then have to say, what kinds of worlds do we want to build?
I'll make the mistake of nodding again.
Oh.
So.
I think any game making process is about world building. It's just that with VR you're doing that a lot more basically. The level of depth that is required is just exponential essentially. But I think what I find really interesting about that, and it you kind of alluded to, John, is the fact that as game makers it tends to be a collaborative process. You need to get a program, an artist, a sound person. I think what something like VR does is it gets that team to collaborate a lot more. I think you're having to go, all right, the 3D artist makes this photorealistic cup, but then what's the story behind this? What's the sound? It just goes a lot deeper, and it means that people have to kind of come out of their silo and talk to the sound designer or speak to the program. Actually, if I'm going to pick this up, what am I going to do as an artist to make sure you can actually work with this? So it becomes a much more collaborative process, even more so than it is anyway. And I think what that does is that kind of more cohesive look or more cohesive creative output from different individuals just elevates the whole process. And you just have to go to kind of a particular depth that is goes back to that threshold I mentioned earlier. If there's a kind of overall aesthetic and you match that with the kind of threshold depth, then you can get away with a certain level of interactional realism. And you can only get that if collaboratively as a team you're all on the same page essentially. Because if this thing looks great, if it functions well from a programming point of view, but if it sounds rubbish, you've lost the audience right away. So you need everyone to be on par. There's none of these elements are more important than the other. Experience against the kind of the overall cohesive thing is the most important thing. In that sense, that's why the world building is so important.
So I actually think that if you look at like art history, and if you take VR, I'm thinking of VR as a sculptural medium because of the three-dimensional nature of it. Quite often we think about the figure in the ground. So the figure as the object that you should be sort of directing your focus to, and the ground as everything else that's around it. And I think in that sense, you need to. It's like making a painting. You need. This is the thing you want people to focus on, but then this is the bit that it's set in. So instead of like the coffee cup might be another figure in the world, but it's almost like dropping the world out as the ground, making it less the focus and the figure more the focus, rather than everything. Because you could end up in a situation where everything in a virtual, so recreate this room virtually, and the blinds become really super interesting, but they're really not. But you're going to want to go and play with them but you can. So it's about keeping that focus on the figure and lessening the ground. If that makes any sense.
Quite early on when we were doing Patience to Set, the first time we done a demo, we wanted to tell you a story, and we also put a flare gun in your hand, and it's obviously attached to that flare gun you had a body. And what we found is we were trying to tell you a story, but people were just like that. So we had to remove it. We had to get rid of it because we couldn't tell our story. I think that might be
because it becomes the focus. Yeah.
I wonder, just hearing Rhoda talk about VR and sculpture there makes me, because I'm from a theatre studies background, and I've been thinking a lot about VR and immersive experiential storytelling or dramaturgy, I guess is another word I would use. But the extent to which, because VR is about building worlds, whether it's actually a kind of expansive medium in a way, because you can put anything in there. Like it can be a game, or it can be an exhibition, or it can be a piece of performance, or that actually it kind of shifts as a medium in that way. I think that's something that I've found in things I've encountered, but I wonder if anyone had thoughts about that.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's just a tool. At the end of the day, it's not this magical thing. It's just a tool, and we're all going to come to it with what we want to do with that tool.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite, I guess, hard. I don't know if it's the right word, but as someone who makes video games, to me VR is for making video games. That's just how I think about it. But clearly it's not, and it would be great for me if I could take a bit more of a step back and think more about the other things that you can do with it. Like, I'm aware that they exist. Like my company, we also do like training stuff for industry and whatever, but like the fact that Rhoda here does sculpture with it is not something I've particularly considered. Like, I'm aware that it's possible, but I've never thought about it more than, oh, you can make a sculpture in VR, great. And it would be good for me and probably everybody to be able to widen their horizons and go, this is just another tool. It's just like a blank page. You can write whatever you want. You can draw a picture. You can scrumble up. You can do anything you want with it. And being aware of what you know and what you don't know, probably more aware of what you don't know about what you can do, is, I don't know, I'm just self-reflecting now. Yeah, great, I should do that.
I think that's the power of new technology like VR, because I remember, like, I grew up, hugely into comics. I wanted to draw comics, etc. I remember when I first came to the realization that making comics is a particular type of industry, and there's particular rules and things that you have to essentially comply to, either writing the story or being the inker or the penciler or there's very, very specific rules and boundaries. And once I realized that, I was like, I don't want to make comics anymore, because I don't want to do those. I just want to tell stories in my own way, and it's very, very specific how these comics are actually made. It's very for good reason, because it is an industry, right? In the same way with film, as a medium, film is what it is. And of course, you can do experimental film, you can do whatever you want, but really, most avenues lead you to make something that's entertaining, or a horror thing, or a drama, etc. I think what's really interesting about new emerging technology like VR is that there are no rules. You can really help direct and experiment without any kind of preconceived notions. These things exist, but we have the power to kind of really use our imagination, kind of essentially push the boundaries and kind of invent things from scratch, essentially, right? So that's the law of something like VR, is that anyone can come into this field and decide what it could be and push the boundaries and make mistakes. That's all cool, and come up with something brand new. That's amazing. Or maybe realize that ultimately you're going to have someone does the story, that they're giving an ink and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's what it's going to be, but maybe not.
All right. Any more questions? So Rachel's double dipping here.
Sorry. So I'm interested in this idea that we can do anything with VR, right? Because it's kind of new, and so we can choose what it is we want to do with this. And I wonder about thinking of VR as an empathy machine, because I think that's really, for me, what it's good at, is creating that immersive experience and that opportunity to maybe enter into someone else's experience. And so I just wonder, if we took that idea and ran with it for a minute, if that's, someplace that we could, in a very positive way, make VR go.
I think making something that you think is interesting to you in a very personal way, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same. So it's the same as standing in front of a painting. The painter thinks one thing when they're painting, but then the audience are thinking something else because they're bringing their own cultural experience to it. So I think if we make with that in mind, knowing that we can't necessarily jump into the mind of someone else, or we can try and get as close as we can in an artistic way, yes, but I would be wary of saying, it's like with the one I mentioned about the how someone with autism is going to experience like a visual hallucination. I know that I can have a conversation with someone who has those experiences, and they can tell me the sort of colours and how it feels. But then if I try and recreate that, I'm never going to match what they're making, and then they can never actually experience the VR piece that I would make based on their experience. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's a great tool. Yes, let's use it, but let's do that with a little bit of wariness about you can't reproduce someone's experience exactly, because it's their personal experience. But I think it's a good.
I do think one thing that we kind of really do struggle with is, like I say, it's being able to see something from somebody else's perspective. That's it's an incredibly valuable thing to do. I think there is an opportunity in VR, especially with the way the video work is going to perhaps kind of step into the shoes of someone and be able to live through like maybe a day of their life or something like that in order to try and experience it. I don't think you would experience or see anything like remotely like exactly how they would, but to be able to kind of step into someone else's shoes or something like that, I think is quite an interesting concept, so that maybe you may actually be able to build some empathy towards another person.
All right. Any more questions? Okay, in that case, I think we say massive thank you to this panel. And if you want to continue the discussion, I think the plan is to head to Curlers, just down the road for a beverage. So, yes. And thanks to Rachel and Gareth for letting me do this.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right.
If we can sneak in one quick final announcement for this, since we have so many captive people here. So this is a series of events, and I'm happy to say that our next event, which will be on the website soon, is going to be over in Edinburgh, because this is kind of a Scotland-wide remit. So we're going to be over in Edinburgh on November 5th for our next event. And we are going to be looking at kind of the built environment and how VR affects kind of design practice and designing future places and future spaces. That should hopefully be a lot of fun and a lot of interesting contributions. We hope to see many of you there. So November 5th, and check our website and there will be an Eventbrite, and yes, hopefully we'll see lots of you.